Welcome to Psyched for Psychology, a Nystrom & Associates podcast. Our hosts, Michelle Iverson and Brett Cushing, are both licensed marriage and family therapists at Nystrom & Associates. Each week, they talk about all things mental health and therapy, and you get a chance to dive into specific psychology topics that help promote personal development and wellness. And now, here are your hosts, Michelle and Brett.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Psyched for Psychology. My name is Brett Cushing. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist with Nystrom & Associates.
And I'm Michelle Iverson, also licensed marriage and family therapist at Nystrom. Thank you so much for joining our podcast today, Psyched for Psychology. Episodes will be released weekly on Tuesday mornings, so you can email us at podcast@nystromcounseling.com. We'd love to hear feedback, ideas for upcoming episode topics, and just about anything else that you would be psyched to hear us talk about.
Before we start our topic today on self-esteem, Michelle wants to do something a little bit different for our episode. She has experience in helping clients improve their body image and their self-esteem. So there's a regular exercise she likes to teach her clients to help them better understand self-esteem, and she wanted to share that with us and everyone listening today. So we're going to do something different. We're going to do some drawing. We're going to engage another part of our mind. We're going to do something creative. So before we begin, please grab 3 pieces of blank paper and a writing utensil. So find 3 pieces of paper somewhere that are blank. Probably 8 by 11 would be good to give you enough room. And find something to write on. So you might want to pause this for a moment and go grab that. Your drawings will be just for you, no one else, and no one will judge it. Hopefully not even yourself.
That's the most important takeaway. Anytime I do any exercises like this, where we might be doing some sort of drawing or coloring, anything like that, I always like to remind my clients, there is no judgment. I would be the last person to judge anybody on artistic ability, because when I draw a person, I'm just going to draw a stick figure. So we're safe.
I get that. Very hard.
No judgment here. So, hopefully by this point, if you've gotten your paper or your pen or pencil, whatever you have, also, if you just want to listen to this podcast and do this at a later point, that is perfectly welcome too. But if you want to join along with us today, I'm going to do this with you. We are going to do an exercise, a few exercises actually, that are all related to self-esteem and learning about what self-esteem is and what it looks like for me. So when we talk about self-esteem, we talk about this a lot with clients, actually.
Mm-hmm. It's really incredibly relevant, and it's such an elusive thing. It's like, just when I feel like I've got self-esteem, I place it in something, and I feel competent in that area, and then suddenly something happens and I feel incompetent and my self-esteem just vanishes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so nobody likes to feel that way. We want consistent self-esteem. We want to feel good about ourselves, but that tends to be like a really common thing. People come to us with a lot of questions about, how do I feel good about myself and how do I consistently feel good? And so when I have clients with a lot of questions about that, one of the first things I might teach them about is something called your self-esteem bucket. So in a previous podcast episode, we did talk about the stress bucket, which is a little different from this exercise, but a little similar in some ways too. So I want you to grab out your first piece of blank paper and grab your writing utensil, and I want you to draw a bucket. Again, no judgment. I will do, in my case, a very, very simplistic bucket. And we're going to draw our bucket, and we're going to think about that holding our self-esteem. The level of water that bucket can hold is really going to be your indicator for you on how good am I feeling about myself right now. The more water, I'm feeling great. The less water, maybe not so good. So we're going to think about that bucket and draw out our bucket. But I also want you to leave some open space at the top of your paper. We're going to put something up there in just a moment. And we're going to draw a small little hole in the bottom of your bucket. So why do we put a hole in the bottom of our bucket? Well, here's why. I always like to explain to everybody that bucket and the amount of water it holds is holding that self-esteem and feeling good, but there's always water dripping out the bottom of your bucket. Here's why. We could do something where, say, like if I got an award for something I did positive in the second grade, right? And I got that recognition. That's probably going to feel really good in second grade. You get your little certificate. You're super proud of yourself. That's going to fill my bucket as a second grader. But I'm not going to feel great all the way through the rest of my adult life just because of this one thing that happened in second grade. That's because our self-esteem bucket has that little hole. There's water dripping at the bottom. So we can't just do one good thing and then feel amazing about it for our whole life. We are constantly seeking what are the new sources of water, new things that are going to help me feel good about myself. So what do we go to? When we think about the things that will fill our bucket, and this is where I want you to use the empty open space on the top of your paper, I want you to either draw or you can write, what are the sources that fill your bucket currently? If you were to draw, you can draw each little thing, or sometimes I like to draw like a little water spigot, like on the side of our house where we can like hook our hose up to. You can draw little water spigots above your bucket as each of the things that gives you water and helps you feel good. So when I draw mine, and I draw my bucket with my little hole, and I draw all my little spigots above, I think about each of those spigots being these. These are the things that give me self-esteem. I think about my role as a mom. I think about achievements that I've made. I think about my career, and I think about how I help people and how I help train new therapists become really good therapists too. I think about my hobbies. I think about my talents. I think about my relationships with my friends and my family. And I think about the ways in which I get to be creative. All of those things I know for me are spigots, water spigots, where when they're open, they're giving me water and they're helping me fill that bucket.
I think that's really helpful because as I'm listening to you, Michelle, I think of people and their identity is so tied to their self-esteem that, okay, I'm a police officer. I see these police officers who do their last sign off, and it's very emotional, understandably, and they've, invested a lot. But then what do I do? I get to retire early as a police officer. My whole identity was tied to that. Right. That's not just for cops. That's for teachers. That's for doctors. That's for anybody. And so I'm glad you talk about this hole in the bottom because there are things that happen in life. There's tragedy and there's traumas that occur that sort of appear to take our whole identity away. And when our identity is attached to the self-esteem, it's such a tenuous thing. But also what I'm hearing you say is that it's our life. We get to determine what's going to define it too. So we can add and contribute and create, even though life and regular things happen in life that take away our self-esteem, we can keep adding to it. That's a very empowering thing.
Absolutely. And we're going to actually talk a little bit more too about what happens if I only have one source or only a few sources of water. But yeah, at the moment, I want us to start to think about like, how full do I feel like my bucket is? And what are the sources of water that are filling it currently? I also want you to think about there are more sources of water than just the ones that I listed. Let me give you a few other common examples for people. Some people will go to things like their athletic or artistic ability. Clearly, that is not the case for me, so I did not put that as a spigot. Artistic ability is not one for me. They could be like other roles that you might have, like my role as a sibling, my role as a partner, my role as a dog mom. Any of those roles will work too. Sometimes people volunteer, and that's a big part of what fills their bucket. For some people, it's their spirituality. For others, it might be things like their morals and values, like their performance at work and school. And for others too, I don't want to ignore this one, but for a lot of people, it can be things like appearance and weight and shape. So we think about all of these different categories, and you're thinking about the ones that apply for you. Which ones are filling your bucket? I also want you to evaluate and really think critically about each of those sources of water, because just because we sometimes get water from one of those sources doesn't mean we always get water. So I'm going to just use appearance, shape, and weight as one of those examples. I usually work with a lot of clients on, what does this one provide for you? Because when we think really critically about it, sometimes, if somebody were to compliment on how my hair looks today, that's probably going to give me some water from my bucket, right? But at the same time, if I look in the mirror and I don't like what I see, what does that do? It might give me no water from my bucket, or it could have taken a previously full bucket from all the other things that I, love and appreciate in my life, and it might have taken all that water and dumped it all out.
Yeah, I can relate to that, and just how tenuous. What I'm listening to, I'm realizing how tenuous this is, and I'm going through a learning curve through some things here at work, and I'm learning SharePoint and OneDrive, and I'm just glad I got the terms down right now, and it's like taking a week. And I can feel really competent 1 week, and I can feel incredibly incompetent the next. And I think you're really highlighting the tenuous nature of self-esteem, and it's not something we have to be subject to passively. We get to contribute actively, and we need to continually contribute to our own sense of self-esteem and identity.
Absolutely. And so that's why I love this exercise for people. We start to critically evaluate it. What is going into my bucket right now? And if you've had your opportunity now to either draw or write out all of the things above your bucket that go into it, I also want you to think about and put a little star by the ones that feel to you like these are not just a good source of water, but a very consistent one. Things that will fill my bucket, help keep it filled, and not dump it out.
I would think that can be hard for some of us.
Hard.
What is a consistent flow of water into our bucket? Because for some of us, life is very unpredictable too. Even people have not been a source of security. Even people can't be that source of a secure flow of water. I've heard a lot of my clients say they love their dogs, they love pets, because pets seem to have that consistent, unconditional source and reservoir of feeling good about yourself.
Absolutely. So maybe your pet is one of your spigots that you're going to put above your bucket. And you're going to put a little star right next to it, right? Yeah. So we're going to now take our bucket on that piece of paper. We're going to set that aside for just a moment. I'm going to have you pull out a new piece of paper. We're going to, we've thought about how full our bucket is. I also want to start to think about how often are we going to each of these sources of water, because I think that's really important too. So we're going to go back to math class. We're going to think about pie charts. Really exciting, I know. But we are going to do something called the Self-Esteem pie chart, which I really like and I appreciate. And this does go along with the bucket exercise. In a moment, you'll find out why. So on your new piece of paper, we're going to draw a big circle. We are, and before anybody kind of begins, I'm going to just walk through an example. I'm going to practice some vulnerability on the podcast today, and I'm going to talk about an example of what a pie chart would look like for somebody, and I'm actually going to use myself, but I am going to use myself from high school, who is a different person than who I am now. And I'm going to first kind of walk through how we create this pie chart, what it kind of looks like, and then we're going to draw your current one together. So what would my self-esteem pie chart have looked like in high school? Well, when we think about a pie chart, we're drawing a big circle, and then we're thinking about breaking that circle up into little pieces, like pieces of a pie. In this case, we are thinking about what gives us self-esteem, and not all the pieces of that pie are going to be the same. There are going to be some things that you would have either currently or for me in the past in high school, I would have gone to more often. If I thought about my bucket, my source of water, how often am I going to that source of water to see if I can help myself feel good about myself? And again, maybe I don't. Maybe I get water. Maybe I don't, depending on the thing. So when I try to figure this out and I think back to high school, okay, what helped me feel good about myself way back in high school? I draw my circle and I try to draw like what was the biggest part of the pie and how often was I going to that source of water. The first piece I drew was appearance.
Imagine that, a high school student being preoccupied with appearance.
With their appearance.
Yes. And I'm so glad we never worry about that after high school either.
Right. But it was a big piece of how I thought I would feel about myself and if I would feel good about myself. What was I wearing that day? How did I look? Did I have the latest in fashion? That was a big, big piece. And so when I thought about how often I was going to that source of water for my bucket, I marked it as making up about a third of my pie chart. So 30% of the time, I felt like, you know what, I'm going to the source of water. That doesn't mean that I necessarily got water, right? For me, growing up in high school, I did not have the type of body that fit what media was saying girls should look like, right? That makes it really hard to feel like I'm going to be able to fill my bucket.
And even when people can achieve that, it's hard. There's even more pressure than to maintain it as well, whether it's a girl or a guy for that matter. I think there is far more pressure on girls. But
guys feel that too.
Oh, guys
Absolutely.
do. And we think, okay, once I get there and I have this appearance, then everything's going to be great.
I'll fill my bucket.
Right, my bucket's full.
And my bucket will stay full.
Right.
But
there's so much pressure to maintain that now too. Even I think more pressure to maintain it because you don't want to lose it.
But then you're even more at risk that, again, you have a day where you're not feeling yourself and you don't like yourself. You could lose that entire bucket of water. It is a risky place to go to, right? So that was still, though, like I'm going to be real and honest with all of you and with myself. And that's where I was going about a third of the time. So then I thought about what's the next biggest piece of my pie chart. And the next biggest piece, about the same, about 30% of the time, I would say would have been performance in school. So that one we might be like, oh, well, that should be better, Michelle, right? Like you were a good student, like you should have been keeping your bucket full all the time with that. But really, there's a risk to that one too. I was a good student, worked really hard in school, but there's also that risk of say I didn't get a good grade on something. That could have dumped and probably did dump my whole bucket out at that time.
Yeah, a lot of fear and vulnerability, I would think, associated with that. For me, luckily, I didn't have to worry about that. I was always going to be a BC student, so I just didn't really have a bucket there. But it doesn't matter either, whether it's appearance or achievement in a general sense. Those are two, I think, that we all can relate to, appearance and achievement. Again, because we're concerned a lot about what other people think and what we are telling ourselves that other people think. And so we have these narratives going and all the pressure that builds in our lives. So I'm curious, to hear more. How do we get away from this?
Oh, I will cover that in a minute.
Okay.
Absolutely. We're getting there.
I'm on the edge of my seat.
I know.
Okay.
But I'll walk you through the rest. So the ones that were certainly better, I think, for more consistent self-esteem were also the smallest pieces of my pie chart in high school, which is interesting. About 20%, my relationships with my peers and my family. About 10%, achievements, and about 10% for hobbies and talents. I feel like there's a lot missing to that pie chart, right? I feel like in looking back, especially easier to look back now, I was going to sources of water that weren't necessarily being consistent for me and also had that flip side, right? Bad grade on a test, don't like how I look today. I could lose all of that water. And so when I think to what my current one is now, I like it more. I think it's balanced. I think it's consistent. And while I walk you through how I created the one that I made for today, I'm going to have everybody kind of think about and start to create the one that you think fits for you as well too. So when I think about my current one, I took on my new piece of paper, I drew my circle, and I started again to think about, well, what's the biggest piece of the pie? I figured I actually had about 3/4 of my pie that were split evenly, so 25% each, between three big things. I thought about, so 1/4, 25%, my role as a mom and being a dog mom, a human and a dog mom. I'll put those together. I thought 25%, another quarter, about my career. Again, helping people, being able to train our brand new therapists, and how much meaning that grants and that gives me. And then I thought 25% on my peer and my family relationships. And then for the rest, that last 25%, I had about 10% hobbies and talents, 7.5% creativity, and 7.5% achievements. So what changed? Appearance went away. So for me, and this is me creating this for me, I'm always realistic with clients. I'm like, sometimes the appearance stuff might not go away entirely, but if we want to make room for new things, that'd be one of the things I would say, hey, do we want to see that one go down? So then we can make room for other stuff that would fill your bucket. For me, I took appearance out of there because the way that I think about appearance now, compared to when I was in high school, I can still get water from my bucket. Like, if somebody were to compliment me on like, hey, again, your hair looks nice today, or recently I got my nails done, it felt nice. It can give me water from my bucket, but I'm not going to seek it out.
Right. So I can see it's a healthier balance. It's not all or nothing. Mm-hmm. Like, it's because it was so much a part of your pie that if you got something good and some positive reinforcement about appearance, hey, that meant so much more. Mm-hmm. And now it means something, doesn't mean as much. So that's what I'm hearing is a greater balance on how you define yourself.
And that I don't need to seek out that validation from other people on how I look either. That was a big part of what was going on in high school. I was having to seek out and kind of see and hear that feedback of, Michelle, you're wearing the right clothes, you got the right look.
Well, that makes sense anymore. Because when the appearance takes up such a large part of our pie chart and it's not getting filled up, we do just what you said. We go and we seek it out. That's a great point.
And one new thing that's in my pie chart now that I thought was actually going to be really interesting since we're doing a podcast day, I felt like creativity recently wasn't there. Like, I really felt that piece missing and I really wanted more of that piece. And then we started our podcast, and that actually has been a wonderful way of being able to fill the bucket. We've been talking about how we really look forward to these Fridays when we get to record our podcast.
It is energizing. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And it's funny, I didn't really think about that, but that has become a part of my own pie chart. And it does feel good. It feels good that we can help other people with things we're learning, things we've gone through in our own lives. And that does feel really good.
Absolutely. So when we think about, and if you've been drawing your own chart, these are the questions that I really want you to think about. I want you to think about, how does my pie chart look now? How do I feel about it? Is there new categories or categories that you used to have that aren't there anymore? Is there anything that you want to have look different? And it's okay if, say, I was a person who never really had any hobbies, to say, I want to try and find some. Like, that's a new piece to my pie chart that I would love to see fit in there. And what could that look like?
That is so empowering, because I think for so many of us, we've believed that my pie chart, so much of my identity has always been X, Y, or Z. And so rather than trying to change the pie chart completely like you're talking about, we kind of feel like I have to stay in this kind of mode of identifying myself, and things don't fit, but then there's so much pressure. I think of Friends. We love Friends, and we've
Yes.
talked about Friends. Remember the episode when Monica dated Chip from high school? She said, remember I always wanted to date Chip from high school? Well, I just dated Chip from high school because he hadn't changed at all, still had the same motorcycle, everything.
Yes.
And I think sometimes that's kind of a metaphor for us in life. We have this old identity that we carry with us and we're so proud of, but then it kind of becomes a ball and chain that we kind of pull with us because we feel so attached and I have to define myself this way. And what you're saying is, no, you don't have to. It's your life. You get to define it and you don't have to be stuck to old categories. You can create new ones.
This relates back to the bucket. If I've got my bucket and I want to fill it with water, I get to choose where I want to go.
Powerful word there is it's choose.
It's
I
choose.
get to choose. I have a choice.
Yeah. And we can almost make mindful, small choices every day to really think about that. Which source am I trying to go to today? And do I want to pick a different one?
It's got me thinking. What do I want to do? What are the choices I want to make? And these are great takeaways for us today. I think it's got me pondering some things, and I've seen this a little bit because I think for men, we tend to define ourselves. And I can't remember who said this, but I really could relate to it as a man. Men have two mirrors that they look at, and there's one for home and there's one for career. And so they look at each mirror every day, so to speak, and they say, mirror, mirror on the wall, am I doing any good at all? And so men then kind of look at career and say, am I doing any good here? And then, okay, I'm doing okay here. Am I doing any good here at home? And, well, maybe not so well here. And it's hard to feel like I've got a good balance in both. But I think that speaks to what you were speaking about earlier, balance. Do we have good balance? And do I want to make my career my entire pie chart? Right. And I think that's what we can do as men. I think that's why men, we struggle if we're out of work because so much of our identity is tied to that. And really, again, so empowering that we get to decide. Other people or society does not necessarily have to dictate who we are, who we're going to be.
Absolutely. And we see that a lot with moms with kids, right? And that shift in identity, they'll often see a big change in their pie chart after having kids, whether you choose to work or stay at home. That's a really common theme is things really changed. I felt like I had to lose my hobbies, my interests. I had to lose these huge chunks of my pie chart. And often we're working on what can we do? Is there things we can do to start to bring those pieces back in for yourself?
It speaks to the larger point of loss, I think. When we are faced with loss, what do we do? And I think for women, I know that at about let's say age 30, there's a bit of a crisis for some women where do I do career? Do I stay home with the kids? And if they pursue one, they feel like they've lost the other. And so they lose that sense of identity and they lose that sense of self-esteem. We can always be defining our lives. It's our lives, and we get to decide what it's going to look like.
And so I would never, when I'm doing this exercise with my clients, I would have them pull out that last piece of blank paper that you have. I'd have them draw one more big circle. And I would never dictate. I would never tell them, here's what your future one should look like. Here's what the ideal one should be for you. But what I do direct them to do is, and I ask all of you to kind of think about too, say about 6 months, 12 months from now in the future, if you don't like the one that you have currently, how would you like the future one to look? Let's add in the pieces that are missing. Let's either expand or shrink the ones that you have currently if you feel like they're not a good source of water or a consistent one for you. Let's rearrange things and have the freedom to rearrange things in any way that you feel would end up helping you to get some good self-esteem and feel like you can feel that way more consistently. And when you've drawn that, we have to think about, how do I get from my current pie chart to that future one? And here's what I always recommend. It's small steps, small goals. It's thinking about if something is missing, what would be a small step, sometimes a very, very small little baby step towards starting to, if it's a hobby, kind of start to search out and try some new things, right?
Yeah, it gets away from the all or nothing kind of thinking that we are prone to, I think, sometimes, which only raises our sense of anxiety. But it's okay to take small steps, build mastery one step at a time, and it will build momentum too. Yeah. And if we try and do it all at once, we're probably going to get discouraged.
It's removing any ideas of perfectionism, right? I should somehow magically just be doing or having that pie chart that's going to happen 6 to 12 months from now. It's really kind of knowing, no, it's these small steps in that direction, starting to get you to where you want to go. And then that mindful choice each and every day. Where am I going? Where am I taking that bucket and going to try to get that filled today?
Well, Michelle, this has really been fun and helpful. I hope for people that have been listening, you are empowered. It's the one thing the one word I would use to capture this episode is we can empower ourselves towards our own self-esteem. We don't have to be the recipients of what other people think of us or past things we've told ourselves. We can take the reins and take control of our lives right now. Is there anything else you want to share as we close out our podcast today?
No, I just hope that everybody had fun with us today and being able to talk together and be vulnerable together and thinking about like ourselves and our lives and thinking about all the choices and the things we get to do to hopefully continue to make things better. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Michelle. We really appreciate you sharing everything that you get to share with your clients. Again, we want to thank you all for joining us today, and please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our Psych for Psychology podcast. We will have new episodes being released every Tuesday morning. You can find us on any major podcast streaming platform, and you can follow us for our new episodes.
And again, please email us at podcast@nystromcounseling.com. Let us know if there's any feedback, comments, or ideas for the future that you'd love for us to talk about. You can learn all about Nystrom Associates and all of our available mental health services by going to nystromcounseling.com. Thank you for joining. We're psyched to talk to you again soon.
Thank you as always for listening, and please be sure to leave us a review. While this podcast can't be a replacement for therapy, we hope you enjoyed our discussion today and join us again next time. Nystrom Associates is always available to those who are struggling. If you find yourself in need of support and help, please check us out at nystromcounseling.com.